The massive observation deck of the Zorn diplomatic vessel hung in silent anticipation. Commander Vexera adjusted the iridescent communication implant at his neck, his six-fingered hands clasped behind his back. Outside the crystalline viewport, the blue-green planet of Earth slowly rotated, looking deceptively peaceful against the infinite darkness of space. This was supposed to be routine. Hundreds of species had gone through this process before. A simple acknowledgement of Zorn Galactic Confederacy's supremacy, a quick negotiation of planetary status, and then integration into the greater galactic community. Vexera had personally overseen first contact protocols for 17 different planetary civilizations. None had ever posed a significant challenge. The diplomatic station orbiting Earth was a marvel of neutral technology, designed to create an atmosphere of calm and equality. Its smooth, silver-white walls seemed to absorb tension, creating a space where even the most complicated negotiations could proceed smoothly. Vexera knew every subtle detail of the station's design, from the carefully calibrated atmospheric conditions to the psychologically neutral color schemes. At precisely 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time, the human delegation entered. Commander Vexera studied them carefully. 3 individuals, 2 women and 1 man, walked with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Their clothing was simple yet precisely tailored. Dark suits that seemed both formal and functional. No obvious weapons, but something about their movements suggested a deeply ingrained readiness. The lead representative, a woman with sharp brown eyes and skin the color of burnt sienna, stepped forward. Her name tag read Ambassador Elena Rodriguez in crisp black letters. Unlike previous planetary representatives who would typically show immediate deference, Rodriguez carried herself with an unsettling sense of equality. "Welcome," she said, her voice clear and controlled. "Shall we begin?" Vexera allowed himself a moment of internal satisfaction. The standard submission ritual was about to commence. He would explain the Confederacy's organizational structure, outline the benefits of galactic membership, and then guide the humans through their expected role as a developing species. He activated his translation implant and began his standard opening speech, a carefully crafted monologue that had brought hundreds of planetary governments to rapid agreement. The words were designed to be both impressive and subtly intimidating, a linguistic dance that had worked perfectly for centuries. But something was different this time. As Vexera spoke, he noticed subtle exchanges between the human representatives. Micro-expressions, almost imperceptible glances, tiny movements that suggested a deep, unspoken communication. The human ambassador, Rodriguez, listened with an expression that was neither impressed nor submissive. When Vexera finished his carefully prepared introduction, expecting the typical stunned silence followed by grateful acceptance, Rodriguez simply nodded. "Interesting presentation," she said. Those 3 words sent an unexpected chill down Vexera's spine. In all his years of diplomatic encounters, no species had ever responded with such casual neutrality. Most would be either terrified or overwhelmed. The humans seemed calculating. The observation station's environmental controls suddenly felt slightly too cool. For the first time in his distinguished career, Commander Vexera felt something he had never experienced during a first contact scenario: uncertainty. The game, he was beginning to realize, might not proceed according to his carefully prepared script. The negotiation room felt different now. Commander Vexera realized he was no longer in control of the conversation, a feeling entirely new to him. Ambassador Rodriguez sat across the table, her 2 colleagues flanking her like silent guardians, their eyes never leaving the alien delegation. "Before we proceed," Rodriguez began, her voice calm and measured, "I'd like to clarify a few points about your Confederation's standard first contact protocols." Vexera felt a slight twitch in his communication implant. This was not how these meetings typically went. Usually, planetary representatives would be stammering, desperate to prove their worth. These humans were different. Rodriguez pulled out a data pad, its surface flickering with precise, color-coded information. "We've spent considerable time studying galactic diplomatic procedures," she explained. "Specifically, the legal frameworks of first contact established by the Interstellar Diplomatic Convention of Sector 7. The other Zorn diplomats exchanged quick glances. Sector 7's diplomatic conventions were notoriously complex, a labyrinth of legal technicalities that most species didn't even attempt to understand, let alone master. According to Section 14, Subsection C, Rodriguez continued, which discusses territorial negotiation parameters, there are some interesting discrepancies in your standard approach. Her finger traced a line of text, each movement precise and calculated. Vexera's secondary translator began to overheat. The human was not just quoting the convention, she was deconstructing it, finding gaps and potential challenges in real time. The junior diplomat beside Vexera, a young Zorn named Kreltax, leaned forward. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No developing species knows these protocols in such detail." But Rodriguez was just getting started. She began to dissect the Zorn's negotiation strategy with surgical precision. Each time the alien diplomats attempted to use a standard intimidation tactic, she would counter with a legal reference, a procedural challenge, or a subtle linguistic trap. When Vexera tried to invoke the species developmental hierarchy clause, a standard method of establishing galactic dominance, Rodriguez simply smiled. "I'm afraid that clause was amended in the Centauri Conference of 2389. Would you like me to explain the specific changes?" The Zorn delegation was visibly uncomfortable. Their universal translator implants were working overtime, struggling to keep up with Rodriguez's rapid-fire legal and diplomatic terminology. "We have reviewed every single diplomatic interaction your Confederation has conducted in the past 300 years, Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. "We know your strategies, we understand your protocols, and we are prepared." Kreltax looked like he might short-circuit. Vexera felt a drop of perspiration, a rare occurrence for his species, form along his neck ridge. This was not a negotiation. This was a dismantling. Rodriguez's two colleagues remained silent, but their postures spoke volumes. They weren't just backup. They were additional layers of a complex, carefully constructed diplomatic machine. Every movement, every glance seemed choreographed. "Shall we continue?" Rodriguez asked, her tone suggesting this was far from a question. Commander Vexera realized, with a growing sense of dread, that humanity had not come to be told their place in the galaxy. They had come to define it. The game had changed, and the Zorn Galactic Confederacy was just beginning to understand the rules. The technology exchange chamber was unlike anything the Zorn delegation had ever seen. Sleek, minimalist, with surfaces that seemed to shift and adapt with each movement. Ambassador Rodriguez stood beside a holographic display, her posture relaxed yet alert. "We'll begin with a modest demonstration," she announced, her fingers dancing across a nearly invisible interface. Commander Vexera expected the typical primitive showcase, perhaps some rudimentary energy weapon or basic shield technology. What happened next shattered every preconception he had about humanity. The hologram erupted into a complex, three-dimensional representation of technological systems that made the Zorn's most advanced schematics look like children's drawings. Layers of adaptive nanotechnology flickered into view, each system more impossible than the last. A weapon system materialized first. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a living, thinking defense mechanism. The hologram showed microscopic nanobots that could instantly reconfigure themselves to counter any known form of attack. They could transform from a defensive shield to a precision strike weapon in milliseconds, adapting to threats faster than any computer could process. Kreltax, the junior diplomat, leaned forward. His translator implant began to smoke slightly, overwhelmed by the complexity of the technological data streaming before his eyes. "This is our baseline defensive technology," Rodriguez said casually, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. The next projection made the weapon system look simplistic. A communication network appeared, a quantum entanglement system that made faster-than-light communication look like sending a message by carrier pigeon. The network could transmit information instantaneously across impossible distances, with encryption levels that would take the Zorn Confederacy millennia to crack. Vexera felt his six-fingered hands begin to tremble. This was not the technology of a developing species. This was something else entirely. "We've studied your technological archives," Rodriguez continued. "Every single piece of technology your Confederation has encountered in the last 3 centuries. And we found ways to improve them, significantly." To demonstrate, the hologram began to show side-by-side comparisons. Zorn shield technology, rendered in pale blue. Beside it, a human adaptation that glowed with an intensity that made the original look like a dim candle. Propulsion systems were next. The Zorn's most advanced faster-than-light drive looked like a crude mechanical experiment compared to the human design. Where the alien technology showed linear movement, the human version demonstrated quantum folding, literally bending space around a vessel. "Adaptive intelligence," Rodriguez said, pointing to a complex neural network that seemed to breathe and pulse with its own consciousness, "is something we've been developing for some time." The demonstration continued. Energy production, medical technology, computational systems, each reveal more shocking than the last. The Zorn delegation watched in stunned silence as humanity systematically dismantled their understanding of technological progress. Krell-Tax whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Commander Vexera felt something he had never experienced before: pure, unadulterated fear. This was not a negotiation. This was a declaration. Humanity was not asking to join the galactic community. They were showing exactly why the galactic community would need to ask for their permission to exist. As the holographic display faded, Rodriguez looked directly at Vexera. Her smile was not triumphant. It was something far more terrifying. It was understanding. The Zorn Confederacy's central communication hub buzzed with unprecedented activity. Screens flickered with strange human content that was rapidly spreading across every known galactic communication network. Commander Vexera watched in growing horror as the invasion began, not with weapons, but with culture. It started with music. Not just any music, but a complex, adaptive sound that seemed to change and evolve with each listener. Alien species across hundreds of star systems found themselves inexplicably drawn to rhythms that spoke directly to something deep within their neural pathways. Researchers later would describe it as a form of audio-psychological warfare. But in the moment, it was simply mesmerizing. Alongside the music came visual art that defied comprehension. Images that shifted and changed, telling multiple stories simultaneously. A single human artwork could be understood differently by each viewer, yet somehow maintain a core message that was both universal and deeply personal. Krell-Tax, the junior diplomat, discovered the first truly disturbing aspect of this cultural offensive. Human entertainment media began appearing on Zorn information networks, not through invasion, but through a kind of cultural infection that seemed to bypass all standard communication protocols. A human television series about exploration caught the attention of multiple alien species. It wasn't just entertainment. Each episode contained subtle layers of information about human psychology, adaptability, and strategic thinking. Viewers found themselves learning without realizing they were being taught. The Zorn communication specialists worked frantically to block the transmissions, but for every channel they closed, 10 more opened. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with bare hands. Linguistic experts were the first to raise serious alarms. Humans had not just learned alien languages, they were actively reshaping them. New communication patterns emerged, blending multiple species' linguistic structures in ways that created entirely new methods of understanding. Ambassador Rodriguez appeared on diplomatic channels, not with threats, but with conversations. She spoke to different species in their own languages, with nuances that suggested not just translation, but a deep, intuitive understanding of cultural context. "We're not here to replace your cultures," she would say. "We're here to understand them, to connect." But the Zorn knew better. This was not connection. This was infiltration. Human art began appearing in government buildings across multiple star systems. Music played in alien marketplaces. Entertainment spread like a virus, carrying with it subtle human perspectives and ways of thinking. The most terrifying part was the adaptability. Each alien culture that encountered human media found something familiar, something that spoke directly to their specific experiences. A methane-breathing species would find human stories that reflected their own social structures. A silicon-based life form would discover human art that resonated with their unique perception of reality. Galactic compiled a report that made Commander Vexera's blood run cold. Humans were not just sharing culture. They were learning, adapting, understanding. And in understanding, they were conquering. No weapons had been fired. No traditional invasion had occurred. But something far more profound was happening. Humanity was rewriting the rules of cultural engagement, one transmission at a time. The Zorn Confederacy was beginning to realize that military might was nothing compared to the power of a species that could make the entire galaxy listen, and want to listen more. The Zorn Central Economic Planning Chamber fell silent as the first reports came in. Economic systems that had remained stable for centuries were now crumbling like ancient structures made of sand. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez sat in a minimalist room thousands of light years away, watching holographic economic charts with calculated precision. Her fingers moved across data streams that most species couldn't even comprehend. Krell, now assigned to economic intelligence, tried to explain to Commander Vexera what was happening. "They're not just competing," he said, his voice trembling. "They're systematically redesigning entire economic ecosystems." Humanity's economic strategy was unlike anything in galactic history. They didn't just enter markets. They transformed them. Where other species saw trade routes, humans saw complex networks of opportunity. Where aliens calculated profits, humans engineered entire economic landscapes. The first blow came through something the Zorn called adaptive market infiltration. Human traders appeared in marketplaces across different star systems, not with weapons or traditional goods, but with solutions. A struggling mining colony would receive advanced technologies. A resource-poor planet would get innovative agricultural systems. But these were not gifts. They were strategic investments. Each technological solution came with intricate economic strings. Planets found themselves increasingly dependent on human innovation. Trade agreements that seemed beneficial on the surface contained clauses that would take decades to fully understand. The Zorn watched in horror as entire economic sectors began to restructure around human-introduced technologies. Their traditional trade monopolies started to crumble. Species that had been economic satellites of the Zorn Confederacy began to look elsewhere for leadership. Rodriguez's team didn't just introduce new technologies. They reimagined economic structures. They created trading platforms that were so efficient, so adaptable, that older systems looked like primitive counting methods. "Watch their communication networks," one of Rodriguez's economic strategists said. "We're not just trading. We're building connections." Cryptocurrency systems emerged that could adapt to different planetary economic structures. Financial technologies that could translate value across species with completely different concepts of wealth. The humans weren't just participating in the galactic economy. They were rewriting its fundamental rules. The Zorn discovered that human economic models could predict market changes with impossible accuracy. Technologies that could analyze economic trends across multiple star systems, accounting for variables that previous models couldn't even recognize. Commander Vexera received a report that made his six-fingered hands shake. In less than 6 standard galactic months, human economic influence had penetrated over 60% of the Confederacy's trading networks. Not through force, not through traditional conquest, through pure, calculated intelligence. Krell found a phrase in human economic literature that seemed to capture their approach. "We don't want to own the game. We want to change how the game is played." The Zorn Confederacy was learning a brutal truth. Military might meant nothing if your entire economic foundation could be systematically dismantled and rebuilt by a species that saw economic interaction as an art form of strategic conquest. Humanity wasn't just entering the galactic economic stage. They were preparing to become its architects. And the Zorn were just beginning to understand the blueprint. The moment of military confrontation arrived like a thunderclap. The Zorn Galactic Confederacy's war fleet assembled, a massive armada that had crushed countless civilizations. Thousands of ships stretched across the starscape, their weapon systems glowing with destructive potential. Commander Vexera stood on the central command bridge, believing this would be the moment they would finally put humanity in its place. They were wrong. 12 human vessels appeared. Not hundreds. Not even 50. 12. The Zorn communication channels erupted with confusion. These were not typical warships. They looked more like adaptive platforms than traditional military vessels. Their surfaces seemed to shimmer and change, as if the very metal was alive and thinking. "Targeting systems engaged," announced the Zorn fleet commander. Nothing could have prepared them for what happened next. The human ships didn't move like normal spacecraft. They moved like living things, fluid, unpredictable, almost dancing between the massive Zorn vessels. Weapon systems that should have obliterated them simply passed through spaces where the ships had been milliseconds before. Quantum positioning technology, the Zorn would later learn. But in that moment, it looked like magic. Each human ship carried an artificial intelligence system that processed combat scenarios faster than entire Zorn command centers. They weren't just predicting enemy movements. They were creating probability fields that made traditional warfare look like a child's game of chance. Defensive systems on the human vessels were equally shocking. Nanotechnological shields that could reconstruct themselves instantly. Weapons that could change their fundamental properties mid-attack. One moment an energy beam, the next a plasma burst, then transforming again before any defense could be calculated. Commander Vexera watched in growing horror as human ships began to systematically disable Zorn vessels, not by destroying them, but by rendering them completely non-functional. Precision strikes that targeted specific system vulnerabilities with impossible accuracy. The most terrifying aspect was the human ship's communication. They worked as a single organism, sharing information and adapting strategies faster than any biological or mechanical system could process. Each vessel seemed to know what the others would do before they did it. "This is impossible," Krelltax whispered, his translation implant struggling to keep up with the rapid combat data. But it was happening. 12 ships, thousands of Zorn vessels, and the human ships were not just surviving. They were completely in control of the engagement. Adaptive camouflage made the human vessels nearly invisible. Weapon systems that could reconfigure themselves instantaneously. Combat algorithms that predicted and countered every single Zorn strategy before it could be fully implemented. It wasn't just a battle. It was a complete deconstruction of everything the Zorn understood about warfare. As the last Zorn ship went dark, a single transmission came through. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez's voice was calm, almost clinical. "We do not seek destruction," she said. "We seek understanding. And now, you understand us." The silence that followed was more devastating than any weapon could have been. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had rewritten the very concept of military engagement. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike any meeting space in known history. Representatives from thousands of species sat in stunned silence as Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood at the central platform. No weapons were present, no displays of force, just a human woman and the weight of her words. Commander Vexera sat broken, his once proud diplomatic career reduced to a cautionary tale. Krelltax stood beside him, no longer the eager junior diplomat, but a witness to the complete transformation of galactic power dynamics. "We are not here to conquer," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying across translation systems that hummed with unprecedented clarity. "We are here to establish a new understanding." The chamber, typically a place of complex political maneuvering, had become something else entirely. A classroom. A court, a moment of collective realization. Humanity had dismantled the Zorn Confederacy, not through a single act of destruction, but through a comprehensive demonstration of superiority. Cultural infiltration, economic restructuring, technological innovation, military precision. Each approach a surgical strike against established galactic hierarchies. Rodriguez's presentation was clinical. She demonstrated how human technologies could solve problems that had plagued galactic civilizations for millennia. Energy production that didn't destroy planetary ecosystems. Communication systems that could bridge species with fundamentally different neural structures. Medical technologies that could adapt to virtually any biological system. "We do not wish to replace your cultures," she explained. "We wish to elevate them." The alien representatives understood the subtext. This was not an invitation. This was a declaration. Humanity had studied every single galactic civilization, their histories, their technologies, their weaknesses, their potential. Where other species saw boundaries, humans saw opportunities for connection and growth. Krelltax realized something profound. This was not about conquest. This was about evolution. The human delegation showed no signs of triumph, no celebration. They presented their capabilities as simple facts. Here is what we can do. Here is how we can help. Here is our vision. One by one, species began to understand. The military might they had feared was just the tip of a much larger capability. Humanity's true power was its ability to understand, adapt, and improve. Rodriguez's final words echoed through the chamber. "We are not your masters. We are your potential." The Zorn Confederacy was gone, not destroyed, transformed. Galactic power structures that had existed for thousands of years crumbled and reformed. And at the center of this transformation was a single species that had been consistently underestimated: humans. Commander Vexera looked at Rodriguez. For the first time, he saw not an enemy, but something far more terrifying and beautiful, a vision of what civilization could become. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity was just getting started.